When you are telling someone to buy Bitcoin, it's because it means you love them.
You need to get everybody around you on board so that you can protect them from the imminent collapse of the fiat system. This is going to change the world more than any technology that's ever been invented. It rewrote my brain. It rewrote the way that I looked at the world.
Bitcoin resonates at this frequency of truth. The more that you interact with it, you start to resonate at that same frequency. What that does is it starts to shed all these layers of falseness. You realize that most of your life is actually a bunch of false layers.
In a lot of ways, the fiat system is a strangulation on beauty. It's a destruction of beauty. It's a destruction of beautiful things. A lot of what I hope Bitcoin will do is this renaissance. I want to reach through time and grab that future and pull it here as quickly as I can.
There's this idea that Bitcoiners were living in the future and we're just waiting for the world to catch up. This concept of self-Bitcoinization, where you essentially take on the principles of Bitcoin and you live your life in a way that is in alignment with the principles of Bitcoin.
These are the benefits I have experienced. I am wealthier, healthier, more fit, more stable, more mentally tough, more stoic, all these things because I have adopted Bitcoin and because I see the world through a Bitcoin lens. I just have accepted Bitcoin and then Bitcoin infused into me, and then I radiate Bitcoin out to the world.
Today's guest is Bitcoin Pilot, a passionate advocate for sound money who helps people navigate their Bitcoin journey with clarity and confidence. From the cockpit to the Bitcoin rabbit hole, he's all about steering others toward financial sovereignty. Bitcoin Pilot, welcome to the show.
Hey man, thank you for having me. This is awesome. That's quite the intro. I like it.
Yeah, I'm so honored to have you here today. I first met you in person at a Bitcoin meetup several months ago and really inspired me to take my orange pill level to a whole new level. And I know you've lived in two very different worlds. You lived in the disciplined, high-stakes life of a Marine Corps pilot, and now you're living the life of a mission-driven path of a high-integrity Bitcoiner. So let's start with what your life was like before Bitcoin and what it's like now.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I like that. Yeah. So I don't think anybody takes one path to Bitcoin. I wouldn't say, because I was a Marine Corps pilot, it helped me get to Bitcoin, or because I was any number of things that helped me get to Bitcoin. But God, where do I start? So before I found Bitcoin, before I joined the Marine Corps, when I was in college, I was studying economics and I thought I was going to be in the finance world, and that was where I was headed. Before I started Bitcoin, or before I started the Marine Corps, I worked a little bit in venture capital and did some internet startup stuff in New York City. And that's actually where I was working before I joined the Marine Corps. Got inspired by a number of things that sort of made me realize that at 25, sitting behind a desk and doing Excel sheets for the rest of my life was not going to cut it. And I just want to do something really challenging, really difficult. And I thought, what's the most difficult thing I can do? And that was the Marine Corps. And went and talked to a recruiter, was at officer candidate school 6 months later. And then when I was going through my initial training, I got the opportunity to become a pilot, which I took the advantage of as part of their competitive air contract. I think your whole life leads you to whatever comes next. And so for me to say what got me to Bitcoin was, I think I had some time. I think a big part of finding Bitcoin is you really need time. I think that's why a lot of people found Bitcoin during COVID. And so I found Bitcoin in 2017, which was the first time. Okay. Thanks. Which was the first time that I was out of the cockpit in the Marine Corps. So up until that point, I had gone through flight school, which was very busy, and then I had gone to a squadron, and then I had been on 2 deployments, one to Afghanistan, and I was the flight operations officer for the squadron, in charge of 300 plus Marines. And so I had a long time of a lot of responsibility and just being very busy. And so I had heard a little bit about Bitcoin. I had a friend of mine come and talk to me about it. He was very orange pilled, and probably the reason I got to Bitcoin as soon as I did. But it wasn't until I had some time to really think about what Bitcoin is and what the world is that it really started to click. And so, like a lot of people, I came into it as it was an investment first. A friend of mine had really put me on the right path towards Bitcoin only stuff, but he was saying, he was throwing out these numbers of where this price could go, and we're at what percentage of adoption we're at now, what would happen if we went to whatever adoption we got to, and got excited about that because I had been an investor since I was 17 years old. Actually, since I was 16 years old, we did a high school project in the stock market, and I was addicted ever since. So I'd always been an investor, always been looking at the stock market, been buying stocks and playing the market and all those things. And so I was always looking for an opportunity. And so to me, that's what Bitcoin was at first, right? It was just, this is a big opportunity. It's a huge addressable market. This thing actually becomes something, could be hugely valuable. And then from there to about 6 months later, I went from this is an interesting idea to this is going to change the world more than any technology that's ever been invented. It rewrote my brain. It rewrote the way that I looked at the world. It rewrote the way I looked at finance. It rewrote the way I looked at technology. And as Bitcoin tends to do, it spiders into so many other disciplines. You think you're getting into, some people come into it because they think it's a technology. Some people come in because they think it's a financial tool. Some people come in because they think it's an investment. Some people come in because of privacy issues or they don't trust the state or whatever it might be, or a political issue. And it spiders into all of those things and then rewires your brain and then reteaches you everything you thought you knew, which is a remarkable thing for what was essentially just an open source software project. And so that's what happened to me. And I went from, I think I was always going to be ready to transition from the Marine Corps to something else. And I was at that period of my life where I was thinking about, okay, maybe I need to go to business school next, or thinking about what kind of work I would do afterwards. And I was lucky because at the time I was stationed in Silicon Valley. And because I was stationed in Silicon Valley, and there were tons of Bitcoin meetups all around that I could go to, and I could speak to people that were really smart on this stuff. And I was lucky because I got to one of my first touch points with Bitcoin was the scaling Bitcoin scaling conference at Stanford that summer of 2017, and I was very lucky to meet a guy named Eric Voskuil, who's a very outspoken Bitcoin advocate and coder, but he also happens to be a former Navy F-18 pilot. And so we connected over aviation, and then he really set me straight on Bitcoin. At the time, I was like, oh, blockchain, and there's these other crypto projects, and there's always and he and I sat down for about 6 hours and really set me straight about what Bitcoin was, why it was important. And I still use a lot of things that he taught me that day when I explained Bitcoin to other people because it really made me understand Bitcoin to a whole new level. And before my time before Bitcoin, I was a concentrated Marine Corps officer and really thinking about either A, how do I serve better, or B, what's going to be next for me? And that question of what's going to be next for me became Bitcoin over the next 6 to 7 years. And really changed the way I look at the world. It changed my lens for how I look at government and what government can and can't do, what government's role is in the world, and what our role is as individuals. And I think it really does color a lot of what you have done, and it makes you think about what you want to do going forward. And so I've really changed from somebody who was a little bit more service oriented towards a larger portion versus now I'd say I'm more service oriented towards those that are in the same belief system as me. And you can ask anybody who I've dealt with when it comes to Bitcoin, like I will sacrifice my time and energy and I'll help as much as I possibly can and educate and help people custody and sit down and explain because it's what I love to do. But I want everybody to be on this team. And so it's a fun experience to get to meet passionate Bitcoiners like yourself, see people change, see the way that their worldview changes. You're going from doctor to doctor. I'm going from pilot to pilot. I'm on a very different path now than I would have been had I not found Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I love the most about Bitcoin is how it changes your lens and changes your path in life. Because for me, it made me realize that I was on this path that the fiat system had laid out and that I had never questioned. And it wasn't a life of my own design. And I had been in the medical system for 15 years and still had never questioned it. It
Right.
wasn't until Bitcoin opened my eyes to how the financial system worked that I started to peel back the curtains in how the medical system worked. And it shocked me that I didn't see it before. And
Absolutely.
it's very scary. And
I think, I don't know if this was for you, but I think for me, there always was an underpinning sort of anxiety of there's something not right about
yeah,
this. But you can't really put your finger on it because you're like, yeah, I don't know what it is. I'm not sure. I can't really, it feels like the system is weird or broken or unfair. And I went to a very fancy private college, and so a lot of my classmates were fancy private rich kids. I shouldn't say rich kids, private wealthy kids from wealthy families, wealthy individuals, and the being that close to wealth changes your lens as well, like we were talking about. So it changes your lens of what's available, what's not, and I, that Cantillionaire effect of being close to those that are in power and being close to the money printers, being in banking and that sort of thing. I saw it happen with a lot of the kids that I went to school with because they, in a world where you need to get as close to the money as possible in order to be successful, instead of graduating a bunch of very otherwise brilliant kids that would go to medicine or art or politics or something that will serve a community or serve the people, so many of them go into investment banking because that's the intelligent, smart, logical thing to do. And I was certainly in that boat as well. And that was the path I was headed on. I worked at a hedge fund as an intern before my senior year. And that was the path I was going down. And then working that internship that summer, I think I came back to school a little bit disillusioned because I was surrounded by people who were making a ton of money, very wealthy, lots of money around. And it just felt like there was something broken. Like I could not put my finger on it, but looking back now through the Bitcoin lens, I know exactly what it was. I can explain now what I think was that underlying like anxiety and the system in which it felt like there were people who provide a ton of value and don't get rewarded for it. And then there are people who don't provide any value that get rewarded hundreds to thousands of times more than somebody who otherwise provides things that we actually need. And so I think Bitcoin for me, one of the things I'm most excited about Bitcoin is this return to a world in which value creation equals value retention. And because you can't just sit next to the money printer, you have to find a way to provide value to more people, and the people that provide real value and more value will get paid for that. And so the return to general practitioner doctors, my grandfather was a surgeon. And growing up, I wanted to be a doctor when I was growing up. And he was so disillusioned, even in his time. This is 35 years ago, 30 years ago. He was basically in the mind of, with malpractice and the amount of good doctors I've seen that have had their careers taken from them or ruined, or the financial burden that they have, and the rise of the logistics class and the managerial class of medicine. He just seemed like it went from something that he loved to something that he was ready to be done with and didn't want to be a part of anymore. And I think that Bitcoin could return some of that sanity in a number of ways. It can remove barriers. I think there have been artificial barriers to medicine set up. And you can talk about this more, but I think there's been artificial barriers to medicine set up that makes it overly expensive and overly difficult to become a doctor of a certain kind. And then on top of that, puts you up against this wall of, if you make a mistake, that might be the end of your career on top. So it's the risk reward. The risk is so large and the reward is not commensurate with that risk anymore for a lot of people. And that's certainly when I graduated from school, there weren't very many people, my peers, that were going into medicine that wanted to be doctors. Whereas 40, 50 years before that, almost half the class would probably be going into medicine or law. And that wasn't really the case when I was graduating. It's really interesting to see the change in that. And I think that Bitcoin kind of can reset the world on those kind of things. And again, if you're providing value, you get rewarded properly and you'll be able to store that value long term. So instead of going to investment banking or politics so you can make money, you can just do the thing that you're passionate about and the thing you want to be good. As long as it provides value to the world, you'll get rewarded for that appropriately.
Yeah, what you're describing, that pressure to go into finance because the incentives basically push you there instead of doing what you're passionate about. That's also something that resonates with me because when I was in college, I really liked psychology courses and I was thinking about being a psych major and making that my career.
Yeah.
But after talking to some peers and some mentors, they pushed me more towards medicine because you make more money in medicine, and how are you going to survive with a psych degree?
Yeah.
So I think everyone has the same issue that they deal with. The fiat incentive system wins out over your passion and what your true calling is.
That's right. Yeah. And And I understand there's going to be demand for certain things. Like, I don't think the demand for plastic surgery is going anywhere. I don't think on a Bitcoin standard, all of a sudden, general practitioners are going to get paid the same as somebody who does high-end cosmetic surgery. But I do think that, but you shouldn't have to go into high-end plastic surgery in order to feel like you're going to be okay or you're going to be financially sound. You have to give up that general practitioner role because you just can't make enough money to even start a family or own a home. I think that's the kind of things that will go away. Or sorry, we should return to a place where you can say, yeah, I don't want to do that type of medicine. It's not what I'm passionate about. I'm going to do this other type of medicine that still has a huge demand cycle and I'll get paid appropriately enough that I can live and have a family and have a house. And I think just this things are so out of whack because of the fiat system. Medicine is obviously we're talking about medicine, but in the same line, if you look at any of these things, health, fitness, the amount of people, amount of children that are being born, home ownership, all of these things are tied back to a broken financial system, broken fiat system. And I think that's why people like me become so passionate about Bitcoin because we see this world broken. But not only do we see the world broken, because it's one thing to be just a doomer, like doomsday, we're all screwed. So what's the point? But to see that part of it and then also realize you have this master key that helps solve a lot of these issues or at least alleviate them to a better extent than the current system does. I think sometimes Bitcoiners get this utopian vibe, or people assume that we have this utopian view of we just adopt Bitcoin, it'll literally fix everything. So we just have to adopt Bitcoin. And to a certain extent, I do believe that's part of it. But I also realize it's going to take a very long time. Mankind gets in the way of lots of things. Humans, greed, general human psychology, all of these things play their own role. And so does it fix everything? No. But does it return? Is it a much better system? Does it return us to a system that is more fair? Yes. Does it return us to a system that will hopefully reward people more fairly for providing goods and value? Absolutely. Have we seen this fiat system and the fall of a fiat system play out time and time and time again? Do we already know the playbook and exactly what's going to happen? Almost certainly. It's not like we're trying this fiat thing for the first time and watching our money debase and what happens to a society that has complete debasement of their money. We don't have to go back that far. People like to use Weimar, but you can use Argentina, you could use Chile, you can use almost any South American country or any African nation in the last 100 years. As an example, I was doing a class for Nigerian women, Bitcoin and for Nigerian women last week, and I did the intro to Bitcoin. We talked a little about Bitcoin and whatnot, and I was talking about the inflation rate in the United States and how since the beginning of the year, the U.S. dollar has lost somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 11%. And one of the women chimed up and said, in Nigeria, it's 22% per month
Oh,
right now.
geez.
You don't even hear about that. But if you imagine what that would be like in the United States right now, if every time you went to buy eggs, they were 22% more expensive every month. And people are living through that right now. Like I said, you don't have to go back that far. But if you want to go to more extreme examples, obviously people use things like Weimar Republic. And if you or your audience wants to read about it, When Money Dies is a great book about what happens to a society when money starts to collapse. I highly recommend it. I read it a couple of years ago. It's a great book about not just money collapsing, obviously, but all the effects that money collapse has on a society. And they're numerous. And if you look around at what we're dealing with right now, the parallels are very hard to ignore.
Yeah, when you talk about 22% in a month, it makes it very obvious, but 10% in the last 8 months is the same exact issue, just on a slower scale.
Yeah, yes, you're right. And people cite 10% and be like, oh, and that's not a big deal. 10% is huge. If your rent goes up 10% a year, which it does in California quite often, a lot of places don't experience that in a regular bit. But that's what you just experienced. It's like they added 10% to your taxes, and it's a hidden tax, and we just deal with it. Not to mention the actual tax that we do deal with, the kind of thing that our founding fathers would have started a revolution over. We just accept that. And then on top of that, there's this hidden tax that's assigned by who? I mean, by what? It's just this constant debasement of our money. And like I said, we have a tool to fight back against that, or I should say, you have a tool as an individual to fight back against that. And that's one of the things I love so much about Bitcoin it's a voluntary system. Every once in a while, if I'm ever feeling doubt about Bitcoin, it doesn't happen very often anymore, but certainly in the beginning when I was learning about Bitcoin and starting to adopt it, and I had these days of doubt or things of doubt, I just would remind myself that don't forget, this is a voluntary system. There is nobody that has adopted Bitcoin involuntarily. Probably we could think of some examples, but for the vast majority, and really, and honestly, from the beginning, for sure, everybody who adopted Bitcoin did it so voluntarily. They just did it because for whatever reason, but for most of the time, they thought it was better. It was better than the current system they had. It was better than chasing stocks in the stock market. It was better than putting it into mutual funds or ETFs. It was just a simple place to put money that would hopefully grow over time. And for those who saw it very early, their money has grown exponentially. And for those who've seen it a little bit later, your money continues to grow much faster than almost any other investment you can make, which means your power of buying continues to increase. And I use this example about spending Bitcoin is another sort of contentious issue for a lot of Bitcoiners. They think if I bought that PlayStation 5 years ago for $500, Bitcoin's gone up 10x since then. So I spent $5,000 on that PlayStation. And yeah, that is one way to look at it. But another way to look at it, the way I like to look at it, is if you had bought that Bitcoin 10 years ago and held it for 5 years and then spent it, that PlayStation 5 cost you $12.50 because you bought that Bitcoin for $12.50 10 years ago. It grew to $500 worth of Bitcoin. And then you use that stored economic energy to buy that PlayStation. And if you hold it for another 10 years, that PlayStation today would probably cost you $1.25. Yeah. So if you waited a little bit longer, I think a lot of Bitcoiners always say, never sell your Bitcoin, never sell your Bitcoin. I think that's outrageous. If you are truly dedicated to what Bitcoin is, first of all, you don't have anything else to spend but Bitcoin. And second of all, you should be thinking about anything you do spend as Bitcoin that you just didn't purchase. So any dollar that I spend, the way that I look at Bitcoin, it's like any dollar that I spend, whether it's for a bottle of water or gas or a trip or any luxury that I need in my life or I don't buy many luxuries. So all of those purchases, I think about them as, well, yeah, I could think about it as in the future, that's going to be $1 million steak that I had for dinner last night. Or I can think of it as, well, I purchased those Bitcoin many years ago and now I'm releasing that storage energy and that steak that cost me $30 today, probably I paid for that same Bitcoin. It cost me $1.10 or something in that regard. And I think that will continue and continue. I think the prices are going to continue because adoption is still very low. People still don't understand the power of it. And it's very powerful to use Bitcoin, have Bitcoin be part of your world. And for me, I spend Bitcoin all the time. And when I'm starting to be more, I wouldn't say aggressive, but I'm starting to be more demanding of being paid in Bitcoin. And for instance, I had to send a package to my old employment. I had an iPad of theirs I needed to return, and they sent me a shipping label, but it cost me $8 in materials to send it back because I had to buy a shipping container or whatever. And so I sent them a receipt and I said I'd like to be paid in Bitcoin. I sent them a Bitcoin address. So we'll see if they figure out how to send me Bitcoin. But that's how I like to look at the world now. Is like I'm a high integrity Bitcoiner. I want the world to be on a Bitcoin standard. The only way I can do that is to pay for things as much as I can in Bitcoin. And I don't know if you saw, but Square recently announced that they're going to start allowing their merchants to accept Bitcoin. So the day that I heard about that, I went to my local cheese shop. It's just down the street. And I asked them if they would consider accepting Bitcoin. And I got their information. I sent it to Square. And then I talked to them last week and they said as soon as it's available, they'll let me start spending Bitcoin here in my local area, my local community. And I love that, A. And B, it was a conversation that now I had with this owner about Bitcoin for an hour. And it gave me another chance to pushing those orange pills and allowing people to start to really understand it. So now whatever I get paid for services or if I'm on the golf course and I have a bet that I win, I only accept Bitcoin at this point. I don't be paid anything else because all I'm doing is transferring it into Bitcoin once I get it anyway. So I'd rather skip that step and just accept Bitcoin. And so I think it's those little things. And because of where Bitcoin is, people are being more responsive to that. If I had tried that 5 years ago, either they would say, I don't know what Bitcoin is, or they would say that's Bitcoin is for scams or for criminals or whatever. And people still feel that way for sure. But the conversations have changed considerably in the last couple of years. And it's probably just bull market things. The price is up, so people are more accepting. if we go through another traditional down market where we're down 75%, I'm sure nobody will listen to me again and I'll just have to wait and wait and wait. But I know that every year we get more adoption, we get more people involved, we get more people excited. And I know from experience, once you get excited about Bitcoin, it's very hard to get unexcited about Bitcoin. You don't see many people really adopt Bitcoin to a certain level and then decide, that was fun. I'm going to go on to something else, or yeah, I was wrong about it, or whatever, because Bitcoin doesn't let you do that because the price keeps going up. And so you really can't ignore it that way. So that number go up technology that we always talk about, which is a meme and funny, it also is it is the driver behind adoption for Bitcoin. And is also the brilliance of Satoshi, because before Satoshi, there were other projects, there were other digital asset projects, and there were a lot of fatal flaws in all of them. But one of the fatal flaws was that many of them tried to manage it. They were basically trying to build a stable coin. They wanted to create a medium of exchange using a stably priced asset. And so many of them fluctuated the supply to keep the price equivalent to a dollar, for instance. So there was a lot of projects out there that were a little like Terra Luna, which I don't know a ton about, but I do know that it was a stable coin trying to do like a mathematical stable coin pegged to the dollar, and it fluctuated supply and those sort of things. But well before that, well before Bitcoin, back in the eCash days, the DigiCash, DigiGold, these sort of projects, these projects that came before Bitcoin. And I highly recommend, there's a book called the Genesis book by Aaron Widrum that is a brilliant history book on all the projects that came before Bitcoin. If you really want to know Bitcoin, you got to know the history of Bitcoin. So I highly recommend people who haven't read that to read that as well. But a lot of those projects, like I said, they fluctuated the price to try. They were thinking this is going to be a medium exchange, so we got to keep the price standard. So we're going to change supply to make sure we keep that price, even if the band goes way up. That's interesting. It's exciting to transact value through a decentralized way, but you weren't getting a ton of adoption because that benefit of sending value digitally is a great part of what the Bitcoin network is. But without that number go up, without that store of value asset or aspect of it, you don't get the level of adoption. And we see that all these cycles. I can talk blue in the face about Bitcoin and trying to get people to listen and try to orange pill them, but the time when they're listening is when that number is going up. It's a lot easier to have that conversation of it's up 100% in the last year. And obviously you're coming to talk to me now because you're thinking about it. I've been talking about Bitcoin, so let's talk about it seriously. It becomes much more difficult to ignore when the price is going up and the prices are doing the kind of things that we're doing right now. Yeah, so all that being said, the power of Bitcoin and the power of Bitcoiners is living it to the biggest extent you can, talking about it. I think number one rule about Bitcoin, you don't tell anybody how much Bitcoin you have. Number two rule is never stop talking about Bitcoin. So always be talking about Bitcoin, never talk about your Bitcoin, right? So for me, that's how I've been trying to live. I'm constantly wearing shirts. It's time for plan B, or a lot of times when I'm walking around near my home, I wear a shirt that says, ask me about Bitcoin. You'd be surprised how many people these last couple of months who will stop me and be like, a lot of times they want to talk about a meme coin or something like that, or ask me a silly question, but it does generally then evolve into a Bitcoin conversation where we talk at least one question or two questions about what do I think about it? Why should I talk about it? What's important about it? And just carrying that mantle to people who are interested. And that's what I've been doing and what I've been really passionate about for the last 8 years now.
Yeah, I love the way that you speak about Bitcoin because you essentially just exude the Bitcoin ethos. And you made reference to this concept of being a high integrity Bitcoiner. And
Yeah.
when I heard you talk about that before, there was the first time I'd ever heard someone say it, and it resonated very deeply with me. And I really like this concept called self-Bitcoinization, about how when you adopt Bitcoin and when you see how powerful it is, you start to take on the same principles as Bitcoin for yourself. So it's almost this like personal transformation tool and like a tool for or a catalyst for spiritual awakening.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit more about what it means to you to be a high integrity Bitcoiner?
Yeah. So I think generally I try to be high integrity in everything that I do. I don't always, sometimes I fail, but generally I think people can count on me. They can count on my word when I say I'm going to do something, or I'll say I'll be there, or whatever it might be. Like that's part of just being a person of integrity. But being a high integrity Bitcoiner means that you're open and honest about how you're using Bitcoin and how you're exploring Bitcoin. You meet a lot of people. At one point, I was close to a lot of Bitcoin influencers, and I got to meet a lot of these, well, not all obviously, but a lot of these Bitcoin influencers. And when you get behind closed doors, the conversation changes a bit. Maybe they're not quite as Bitcoin only as you thought they might be, or maybe their conversations just change a little bit. And not all. I met a ton of great Bitcoiners in those places and in those spaces, and most of them, the vast majority, are very much Bitcoin only, and that's what they want to talk about. That's what they're excited about. And those are the people that I gravitate towards. People I always gravitated towards was people who get Bitcoin and what Bitcoin is trying to do. And for me, that means Bitcoin only. That means I don't get distracted by these other projects. I don't get distracted by, and it's not because I'm closed minded. A lot of the people who are counter to Bitcoin is people that are in other digital assets and other crypto projects are like, you're just closed minded. You're Bitcoin only. You're a Bitcoin maxi, and that means you don't understand this stuff. So that's why. And that's not the case. I went through a phase, I think a lot of Bitcoiners went through, where I thought it was about the technology and about blockchain. And I was trying to become a blockchain expert. I was thinking there were applications for the military that they could use blockchain. And then there were these other projects coming along. And I thought, oh, they might supplant or travel along with Bitcoin. But the more I learned about them, the more I realized that even if they tried to do all the things Bitcoin could do, they would fail in the face of Bitcoin. They wouldn't be able to supplant Bitcoin. And most of them weren't trying to. They were insider, venture capital, scammy, let's take everybody's money and run, and then we'll dump it back into Bitcoin. Like it was all about, let's try to get more Bitcoin. And I still feel that way about all these projects. And I think the people that push them don't truly understand Bitcoin, because if you did understand Bitcoin and what it was, its ethos, where it comes from, how it was invented, what makes it special, and then you understood the history of all the people involved in it, and how many people have come along that are much smarter than me that have tried to quote unquote improve Bitcoin. I think Adam Back wrote an article about this. I think he really started delving into Bitcoin seriously in like 2013. He was obviously aware of it, and he cited in the white paper, and he knew about Bitcoin. But if I remember correctly, I think he really started looking into it and was like, okay, I'm this brilliant cryptographer, got PhDs and all this stuff. I know this probably better than 99.99999% of the planet. There might be 5 people on the planet know this stuff better than me. I'm going to go in and tweak it and see if I can improve it. And after looking at all the different parameters around Bitcoin, the block size, the block height changes, the difficulty adjustment, the nonces, the SHA-256, the cryptography that goes into it, elliptical curve math, and the block timing, trying to get the 10-minute block time. And he came away from it, and there's a great article, let's see if I can find it, of him basically saying, yeah, it cannot be improved. I can't find a single parameter that I would change in Bitcoin. That's the brilliance of Satoshi, and it's the brilliance of the evolution of Bitcoin in its early years. It wasn't all just written in stone in that first block in 2009, but the main parameters that were written in the white paper have stuck, capping at 21 million and aiming for 10 minutes, and how difficult adjustment would work, and the halving cycles and all these things. And here's Adam Back, probably one of a handful of people on the planet who is capable of really looking at this and making an informed judgment. He comes away saying, yeah, I can't make it any better. And so it's that powerful knowledge that not only the work that you have done individually, but looking at people who know this stuff way better than you, and they come away with the same feeling of, this is powerful technology and it's going to powerfully change the world. And so to be a higher integrity Bitcoiner, what it means to me is, okay, I think this is going to change the world probably more than almost anything. I think it's on the level of the 5 greatest inventions of mankind. It's probably the fire, wheel, the printing press, electricity, and Bitcoin. That's where it's at. It's more important than almost any other invention I can think of, and the ramifications it's going to have for mankind echo from here through the rest of time. And so when I talk to somebody who's like, oh, but XRP is going to, I'm like, we're talking about something that's going to fundamentally alter the path of humanity, and you're talking about replacing the Swift network. Like, we're not the same. And the fact that you want to spend your time and energy on something that is at best going to help the bank system or make people's Swift transactions faster. And I'm talking about something that could free humanity from the fiat slave system. Like we're not the same. And because of that, I being a high integrity Bitcoiner means not only do I support and push Bitcoin for what it is, I also don't stand for people who are supporting these other projects that I find to be a hindrance to Bitcoin. Because what I really want is I only got so much time left on this earth, and what I really want is to live as much of that time in a world that is on a Bitcoin standard. And so the faster we get there, the longer I'll get to benefit from being a part of that and getting to live in a world that I find to be more fair and more beautiful. In a lot of ways, the fiat system is a strangulation on beauty. It's a destruction of beauty. It's a destruction of beautiful things, whether it be health and the way people feel and the way people look and the way people act towards each other, whether it be community, the destruction of community and the destruction of single income families and the type of family that I grew up in, the type of family that a lot of people I know grew up in, the world that we grew up in, whether it be ugly architecture. I come from a family of architects. My mom, my two brothers are all architects, and we talk all the time about the uglification of the modern world. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fiat monetary system. And so for me, a lot of what I hope Bitcoin will do is this renaissance. I want to live in a Bitcoin renaissance. I think getting to live through the Italian Renaissance, which was spurred by the creation of the Italian florin and the true gold standard of that era, was really funded by the Medici family creating double entry bookkeeping and creating the Italian florin, which lasted as the term gold standard comes from the Italian florin. And that bit of prosperity lasted for hundreds of years. And I think Bitcoin is perfected gold. So what kind of renaissance can we create through a Bitcoin renaissance? One that can last thousands of years, not just a couple hundred. And the faster we can pull that forward, the better off we'll be. As a Bitcoiner, I want to grab everybody I can and pull. I want to reach through time and grab that future and pull it here as quickly as I can. And being a high integrity Bitcoiner means fighting off fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It means fighting against projects that I find to be a hindrance towards Bitcoin. And it means espousing my beliefs about Bitcoin as often and as vehemently as I possibly can.
Thank you. That was beautifully said. And I think another important part of being a high integrity Bitcoiner is something that I felt from meeting you. Like I've really only spoken with you a few times, not for very long, but that was enough to leave a mark on me. And
Yeah.
just feeling your passion for Bitcoin, it really took my appreciation and my conviction in Bitcoin to a whole nother level.
I'd like to know what high integrity Bitcoiner means to
Yeah.
you, because I think like Bitcoin is different to everybody. So is your interaction with Bitcoin and Bitcoiners. I think it's I think it's fascinating that that really resonated with you. It's not something I say all the time, but obviously it made an impression, and I do try to live that way. But what does being a high integrity Bitcoiner mean to you?
It means what I was saying earlier about this concept of self Bitcoinization, where you essentially take on the principles of Bitcoin and you live your life in a way that is in alignment with the principles of Bitcoin. So I think that Bitcoin resonates at this frequency of truth. And when you hold it, especially when you have it in cold storage, and the more that you interact with it, you start to resonate at that same frequency. And what that does is it starts to shed all these layers of falseness. And you realize that most of your life is actually a bunch of false layers. And
Yeah.
it's not until you resonate with that frequency of truth when you come in contact with Bitcoin that you realize how much of your life is composed of these false layers. And it's a beautiful thing to see them, to finally be able to see it, to realize all these illusions that were in your life, how your life was built on a lot of illusions. And now you can ground in truth. And I think that's the core essence of being a high integrity Bitcoiner, is living in
Yeah.
alignment with that truth.
Yeah. I
So,
think,
yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Another core component is the sovereignty aspect, because when you come in contact with Bitcoin, for me, it was my first introduction to the idea of sovereignty, because before I was just so dependent on all these outside systems. I realized I was just outsourcing my entire life to outside systems, outsourcing my finances to the financial system, my health to the medical system, my thoughts to media. And Bitcoin introduced me to the idea of taking all that back, taking control of it, and having sovereignty. So I think that's also a fundamental component of being a high integrity Bitcoiner is living with that type of sovereignty.
I like that. Yeah, I think we talked about lenses, but it does change your lens. And then what's wild is when you then hear somebody say something that you used to agree with, or you're having a conversation and they make a statement, a generalized statement that they assume or make the assumption that it's just the truth and that you obviously agree with it. And you sitting there and you're going, I would have 5, 10 years
Yeah.
ago, I would have totally agreed with you. And maybe, or if I didn't agree with that, I wouldn't say anything. But now I hear you say it, and like I have to tell you how I feel about it now. Or I keep my mouth shut and I just am sitting there realizing like you haven't had the similar experience I have. You haven't had that shift that I had. I'll give an example. So the college I graduated from, they do a winter study program, which is a 1 month course in the winter. So January, so you have a regular semester, you have a January course, and then you have your fall semester or your spring semester. And that winter semester is a 1 month course. It's usually an intensive course, but it's supposed to be something that's totally unrelated to whatever your field is. So if you're an economics major, it's a time for you to say, I'm going to take an art class for a month, or I'm going to take a class on astronomy, or something totally unrelated to the field that you're in, if that makes sense. And so I was like, man, I've always wanted to, I love educating. I love talking about Bitcoin. Like, I'm going to go teach a course on Bitcoin. That's when I was there, my junior year, I took a class on the stock market, and there was this very successful investor who came up and taught the course for a month, and I was like, "That's awesome," and I learned a lot. And it was one of the investments I invested in Apple because of that class. That was in 2005, and that the investment helped fund my first Bitcoin purchase. Like we were talking about, everything is a stepping stone to something that comes later. And so I thought I would love to teach that class. And it'd be great to stand in front of a bunch of college students and talk about Bitcoin and talk about the politics and the history and the money and the economics behind it. So I put together this course and had a long curriculum, and we were to take the kids on a field trip to a Bitcoin mining facility near my school and this whole thing. And it got denied. And I was a little shocked. But then when I talked to the professor who denied it, he's the head of the econ department. And his antagonism to Bitcoin was, you could feel it through the email. Like, we just had an email exchange, but you could feel his like, how dare you want to teach a Bitcoin to my students? This silly project, this silly world of economics that doesn't understand. You don't have a PhD in economics. You're going to come here and teach Bitcoin to my students. How dare you? Essentially, was the tone of this email. And it made me realize a few things. One, I should have realized that this was going to come up against some serious opposition from a college institution. It was going to feel a bit like a threat. And two, it also made me remember all the things that I learned when I was an econ student and how little of them actually turned out to be correct or matter or be what I believe today. So much about the world, about monetary policy and interest rates and the proper way to handle emergencies, and so much stuff that's based on Keynes and Keynesian economics, to have that stuff be basically wiped clean from what I believe and be replaced with essentially Bitcoin economics. But you could look at Mises or Hayek or any number of sound money Austrian economics. I don't pretend to know that much about Austrian economics, but I know that it's a bit of the underpinning of what Bitcoin is. And I realized in that moment of, I would have totally agreed with this professor 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and now we're on the complete opposite side of the fence. And there is this antagonism towards Bitcoin from those hallowed halls, and there will be forever. And I was like, oh, I'm going to submit it. Okay, I understand your objections. I'm going to rewrite it and submit it for next year. And his response made it feel like there ain't no chance they're going to let me teach a Bitcoin course anytime soon. And so I might be wasting my time. I'll come talk to you instead and continue to educate, or maybe I'll just have to start my own school and Bitcoin hits $100 million a coin or something.
Your story kind of connects to what we were talking about earlier about the importance of being a high integrity Bitcoiner, because and you talk about this, about how you spent so much time trying to pill people and educate people, but a lot of times you realize that was just wasted energy. And
Yeah.
actually, the best way to orange pill someone is to just live a life of a high integrity Bitcoiner and let that speak for itself. And your effect on me is testament to that. And I,
That's really flattering to hear. And I'm glad you don't always make an impression, and you certainly don't always get to hear somebody tell you that you actually made an impression. Like I said, I'm very flattered and humbled. I appreciate you saying that. But that being said, you're on this path now where you must be having an effect on the people around you. You must have had this experience now a few times where people have really come around to what you're talking about.
yeah, I don't have many followers, but it surprises me when I get messages, and all it takes is one for me to keep going.
Yeah,
If I
that's
can
right.
just help one person, it's all worthwhile at
Yeah.
yeah, because once Bitcoin hits you in the way that it hits you, the way that it hit you, and the way that it hit me, and the way it's hitting more and more people each day, it just inspires you to make it your mission to spread this knowledge. And you talked about this before about how when you are telling someone to buy Bitcoin, it's because it means you love them and you want them
Yeah.
to be protected in the future. And
Yeah.
so, can you describe what it is that you're trying to protect them from?
Yeah, I said that a while. I said that a long time ago. I mean, I don't remember where I was or when I said that first, but I said something along the lines of, when I say Bitcoin, what I'm really saying is I love you. And I think it came because the first people I tried to orange pill were the people that I loved.
Mhm.
It was my family, it was my friends, it was the people around me. And I think because when you first figure out Bitcoin, it feels frantic. It feels like
Mhm.
you found this secret and this secret is going to explode like next week. Everybody's going to figure out what you know,
Mhm.
and the price of Bitcoin is going to run away, and it's going to be harder and harder to stack Satoshis. And you need to get everybody around you on board so that you can protect them from the falling collapse or the imminent collapse of the fiat system. Because the flash crash of the fiat system would be horrific. It would the very quick ending of the fiat system and switching to a Bitcoin standard would be catastrophic for many people in the world. And I think Max Kaiser talks about this. We should be so grateful that Bitcoin is adopting at the rate that it is because it confers benefit to those that have adopted it early, but it also gives people who are coming late to still benefit slowly from it. We can have this sort of, if you think of the fiat system as this giant tank, it's like slowly draining its energy out as Bitcoin is getting
Mhm.
its sort of equilibrium is coming and taking that energy and putting it into a new and better system. Whereas if we just drained this thing and then hoped Bitcoin
Mhm.
would catch some of that energy, it would be the worst catastrophe that's happened to mankind. But if as a Bitcoiner you see the faults of not being on that Bitcoin train before as it's leaving the station. And so for me, part of it was selfish. I was like, hey, this Bitcoin thing is going to take off. It's going to make me very wealthy. I want you all to be very wealthy and come along with me so that we're all protected and we're all safe. I think it's the same way that anybody looks at their children or their family, their kids, their parents. They want to protect them in some way, shape, or form. I feel like because I've been stacking Bitcoin, I'm creating a structure that helps protect them from the system and from financial issues in the future. And I'm building a house that's going to protect me. I want them to build a house that's going to protect them. If Bitcoin does well enough, my house will be big enough to protect everybody. But why would you not want the people you love to be a part of that? Right? Why would you not want them to benefit in the same way that you're going to benefit? Why would you not want them to be protected in the same way that you're protected? And it also became, I was definitely going towards the people that I loved first and the people that I cared about first, and then just trying to orange pill people in general. And so that idea of buying Bitcoin is love because Bitcoin is love. It's in the same way that people want to protect their kids and want to protect their parents, want to provide for the people around them, or not even provide, but just literally, I want to feed the people I love. I want to house the people I want to love. I want to make sure the people I love are safe and comfortable. And I want them to save themselves because this thing is going to happen whether they want to or not. And ignoring it is only going to make the problem worse. And so I think of Bitcoin as people are like, oh, you got to get on Bitcoin before it leaves the station. And the good thing about Bitcoin is it's like an infinite train. It's always leaving the station. And the way I think about it is like whatever your destination is, the earlier you get on it, the earlier you're going to get to your destination. And there's no real final destination for Bitcoin. No, there's just this infinite improvement of your life. And I've experienced a little bit of that because I've been on this train now for 8 years. The people that got me on, they benefit a lot more because they were on it earlier. And the people who got on in the very, very beginning and had the conviction to stay on the train the whole time are billionaires now. And they Somebody just sold 80,000 Bitcoin a couple weeks ago. Unlocked, they became one of the 500 richest people on the planet, and all they did was buy Bitcoin in 2010 and hold on to it for 15 years. Those kind of gains probably aren't happening anymore, but being able to protect your wealth is such a powerful thing. I think obviously money is important, but I don't think you can overstate how important monetary value is to not just you, but to humanity in general. And if you study the history of money, you start to recognize that it's one of the foundational technologies that we invent. It separates us from basically every other species on this planet. And it is hardwired into our DNA to collect and use scarce assets, whether it's agri beads of Africa or wampum of the United States or yap or oh my God, the yap people. What's the stone that I can't think of right now? So bad. The rhinestones. The rhinestones of the yap people, all the way back to the reason we created the written word. The earliest history we have of the written word are Sumerian tablets that were used as ledgers. That's 6,500 years ago. And so when I say money is important, I don't just mean being rich is important or having money is important. What I mean is it is foundational to who we are as a species. The history of money goes back well before the Sumerians. It goes back 100,000 years of trading things. And not only was it to trade, but it was also the store of value was really like the first insurance policies that humanity ever had. Because if I have a good harvest, well, I can only store so much food for my tribe. If I have 5 times the amount of food that we need for the winter, and I store it through the winter and we eat 1/5 of that, it doesn't really matter that I stored that extra energy. It doesn't really matter that I stored the extra food because it's going to go to waste eventually. It's going to rot and go to waste and I'll have to throw it all away. And so money or a form of money allowed me to trade that excess away and then store that value in something that would last longer than just one winter. And so it created death insurance for everybody in my tribe. So now next year, we didn't have such a good harvest, but we got all these agri beads. We can go next door, trade those agri beads back for our neighbors who did have a good harvest. And we literally just saved lives that would have otherwise died because we didn't have a good harvest this year. But we had a good one last year and the year before, so we were able to store that energy over the last couple of years. And now we have a bad harvest. We had a plague, we had sickness, we had death, whatever it might be. We can at least protect some of these people because we have a money. And I think it gets lost. That's something I didn't really think about is money, right? When I was growing, I was just like, oh, you get money, you get nice things, or you get money, you get a nice house, or you can go on another vacation or whatever. But it really is part of, and you were talking about psychology. I took psychology when I was in college, and one of those fundamentals is this idea of death-defying beliefs. It's what makes the foundation of all of our society. So like certain nations are Christian nations, so they'll have part of their death-defying beliefs are this belief in God and belief in Christ. Others might have another religion that they have that's a death-defying belief, or maybe a death-defying belief is the sanctity of marriage, or the belief that all men are created equal, or whatever it might be that sort of backbones your society. Are these things that by death-defying meaning, like it's something that you might be willing to go to war or die for, this belief. Money is a death-defying technology. It is something that protects you from death. In the same way that a weapon might protect you from death in a war, or a wall might protect your city from invasion or siege, Bitcoin or money protects your wealth from erosion. And that means you can store anything, any benefit you have accrued on the world, any value you have created for the world can now be stored in that money. And then you go through the whole history of the different things we've used as money. And we've now settled on Bitcoin, which is the most perfect money that's ever been created in human history. And maybe the most perfect money that will ever be created in human history. So once you think about that, once you realize that, to me, the powerful tree of history that comes to Bitcoin, that doesn't just expand to the 16 years since Bitcoin's an investment been created, and doesn't just expand to the early days of digital money, which really span back to the 1960s. And that's that book earlier I talked about, Genesis book. The prehistory of Bitcoin is 40 or 50 years. But that thread that connects Bitcoin to money goes back 100,000 years. If you really look at where this idea of storing things and creating money and creating this death-defying technology That's how important Bitcoin is. That's how important money is. So when you think of it at that level, all these other things become distractions. Can you buy fart coin and make more money next in the last year than you did holding Bitcoin? Sure. But like to me, those things are such stupid distractions, such a waste of your mental capacity. We have created the perfect money that's ever existed. All you have to do is take the value you've created and store it in Bitcoin, and it will grow over time and it will make you safer. It'll make you more robust. It'll make you think about the world differently. It'll make you think about your health differently. I can't tell you how many Bitcoiners I've met who have found Bitcoin and then immediately within a year or two lost 30 pounds, given up alcohol, started exercising more, started working out more, quit their job because they realized it was making them depressed or it was sucking their desire to work out of them, started a family, got married. All of these changes, if you look at Bitcoiners, you look at the Bitcoin community, how many communities can you say out there that push good eating all the time, push self-sacrifice, push sacrificing for later, push living below your means? Bitcoiners celebrate the fact that they drive 24-year-old crappy Toyota Corollas, myself included. What kind of community celebrates that? Who puts up their pictures of their old beater car to be like, look how awesome I am? Name me another community. Maybe like the FIRE guys, the financial independence retire early guys, but they don't get Bitcoin for whatever reason, which I think is so weird. But if you look at the things that Bitcoiners espouse, it's tough to look at that and go, yeah, that's not for me. Now, people who aren't ready for Bitcoin do it all the time because they're like, those people are nuts. They eat nothing but steak. They live well below their means. They drive cruddy cars. They don't go on vacations. They don't spend their money. They celebrate the fact that they wear the same shirt, t-shirt and shorts every day. And they're all a bunch of crazies. So why would I want to join that? But then once you get in the bubble and you start looking around, you go, all the people around me care about their health. They spend money on good food. They make sure that they're getting exercise. They call each other out for whatever purchases they make. If I show up, I like watches, right? That's one of the things I'll spend a little bit of money on. But I'll show up with a nice watch, and it's not, oh, nice watch. It's like, dude, why do you spend so much money on a watch? Like
Yeah.
that's the conversation, and that's a wild place to be in our modern world where so much time and energy is spent on being flashy and looking at my nice car, my nice house, and my nice this and my nice that. And we live in a community of people who are the total opposite. The people who are living a low time preference life, trying to spending time and energy and money on things that truly improve their life and their quality of life. And they're taking care of themselves in a way that so few communities push around the world. And I think if you look at those things, I think it's a very powerful message to people who are getting interested in Bitcoin. And then on top of that, when I have questions about things or I'm not sure about a topic, many times Bitcoiners will have an opinion and then fast forward a few years, they're almost always right. I think they have
Yeah.
been more correct, and they've been more correct and earlier on than almost any community of people that I've been a part of. Whether it was whether it was COVID or the great financial that talks about great financial crisis, or every time some politician would do something, it's completely changed my lens on politicians. I've been a news junkie my whole life. I thought I was going to be a politician as part of. I went to the Marine Corps. I was like, oh, I'll be a Marine officer, and then I'll go be a politician. That's going to be my route. I wouldn't stray anywhere near that now, but it completely changed my lens on the things that politicians say. And Bitcoiners have been right on so much of this stuff way before anybody else that I've talked to. And if you follow them and then you internalize it yourself and you try to live the world on first principles, and then when you speak, you may sound crazy for a while. Fast forward 2 to 5 to 7 years, people are going to listen to you because you've been right on so much of this stuff. And I find that to be, it's really nice to be part of a community that I am aligned with, wanting to bring beauty to the world, taking care of their health and their physical fitness, and being generally correct on a lot of these things. And I don't know if you saw or if you heard about there's this correlation between certain Myers-Briggs personalities and Bitcoiners. I think it's ENTJ and INTJ or something along those lines.
Yeah.
And or no, I think it's both INTJ and INTP maybe. But it's something like 3% of the population make up these two phenotypes or characteristics, those two categories in Myers-Briggs, and yet like 55% of Bitcoiners are in those, right?
Mhm.
They're introspective, they're judgmental, they're looking at the world through a logical way and looking at the world very logically, And that's A, making them be able to understand Bitcoin early, and then B, make very logical deliberations about the world around them, and then making choices based on those logical decisions. And so for me, like my health, I've always been healthy, I've always been very fit, but I'm mainly carnivore now. I don't drink very much at all anymore. I never wear sunscreen. I don't eat seed oils. I try to get as much sun as I possibly can. And these are things that, and then it's unfortunate because then I go hang out with my family and my nieces and nephews, and my family spraying them down with all
Yeah.
this flammable sunscreen. And I used to stay quiet. Now I don't. I'm just like, stop doing that, or get them some tallow if you really need it. But if you stop feeding them junk, then they won't burn. I promise you. And as you're talking about, as a high integrity Bitcoiner, I'm proof, right? I can point at myself and be like, I'm super fit and I don't burn, and all I do is eat this and this. And if you do it too, like, you can see those benefits. My mental health has increased tremendously. I don't get the kind of mood swings I used to get, like those kind of things. And I can stand there in front of my people, the people I love, and say, these are the benefits I have experienced. I am wealthier, healthier, more fit, more stable, more mentally tough, more stoic, all these things because I have adopted Bitcoin and because I see Bitcoin, or because I see the world through a Bitcoin lens. And I just think that I'm not special. I just have accepted Bitcoin, and then Bitcoin infused into me, and then I radiate Bitcoin out to the world now. And it does sound religious and it sounds cultish and it sounds all those things, but I don't care because it's made me and my world a better place.
Yeah, that's the thing that fascinates me the most about Bitcoin is how spiritual it is in nature and how it catalyzes spiritual awakenings in people, and how it is going to be the thing that allows humanity's consciousness to upshift. And it
Yeah.
starts by, on an individual level, by allowing the individual's consciousness to rise. And then as more and more individuals' consciousness rises, the whole global consciousness is going to rise. That's what you made reference to in terms of the global renaissance.
Yeah.
And in terms of the spiritual nature of Bitcoin and the mythical origin of how it came to be, and how no one knows who Satoshi Nakamoto is, I'm just curious, do you feel that deep spiritual nature to Bitcoin, and also just how it came around at the time when humanity needed it the most, when humanity was just on a path to blow itself up? If Bitcoin wasn't there, there'd essentially be no hope to getting back on track. So there's got to be something deeper there. So what are your thoughts on that spiritual?
Yeah, I'm not particularly religious, but I do say thank God for Bitcoin all the time. I do believe in God. I'm not particularly religious, but I've had experiences that make it very difficult for me to deny the existence of a creator. And I went down a psychedelic pathway at one point early on in my Bitcoin journey, and it was interesting because on a few of those psychedelic journeys, Bitcoin was at the center along with the creator. It was like the
Mhm.
creator, it was like the creator and Bitcoin in a lot of cases were one and the same, or they were exuding energy from the same place in the universe, if that makes sense. Now I won't go into any more detail,
Well,
too
that's
much more
deep.
detail, but
No, I
like
love that. I love that. Yeah.
it was this journey where it was like it was clear that there was a foundation, like a fountain of energy that was permeating throughout all of us, through us, the world, through the world we walk through, all of it. And in that, in trying to peer into what that central energy was, I found Bitcoin there twice, basically hand in hand with God. It was as if God and Bitcoin were one and the same. And that was, I was already well convinced about Bitcoin. It wasn't like that was like, oh, it wasn't the thing that made Bitcoin important in my life, but it did continue to deepen that conviction around what Bitcoin is. And I do think there's very much a spiritual part of Bitcoin. And I think that are we, this is going into sort of other territory, but are we in a simulation? Are aliens real? Are we just one dimension of many dimensions? Or probably yes, and all of the above. Yeah, nothing is impossible. But I, through some of my journeys, I've come to the realization that part of my role is that I am we are all vessels for the souls that live inside us, and I think those souls are eternal and probably multidimensional. So like we have this role to play, which is to protect that part of the soul that lives in us. And best way to do that now is that this Bitcoin came along and allows me to protect me, my soul, the people around me even more. So it's like a suit of armor. And I don't think about that all the time, but I do come back to that thought that I've had a number of times. And I do say thank God for Bitcoin because, as you said, if we had just continued on the trajectory of the great financial crisis, I don't know where we would be right now. And I don't know what hope I would have for the future because I would be a doomer. I think I, I know I've had conversations with people who said Bitcoin saved their life because it literally it turned them from somebody they thought might commit suicide to somebody who has hope for the future. And I think that's a really powerful statement, but I think it's very true. I think there are people out there who had no hope, people who have, and I talked about earlier, people who have lost weight and got healthy and quit alcohol and stuff like that. But I know Peter McCormick talks about it a little bit. He was a drug addict right before he found Bitcoin. Whether he would have been able to kick his addiction completely without Bitcoin, who's to say? I think I'm sure there are Bitcoiners out there who found Bitcoin and helped them turn their life around from either drug addiction or alcoholism or suicidal ideations and those kind of things. And Bitcoin gave them that hope. Bitcoin is hope. We hear it all the time. Bitcoin is life. And yeah, do I, there's, I have a friend who 100% believes that Bitcoin is the alien technology that was delivered to us by aliens, right? They said, okay, these humans are getting there, their technology is coming along. Now we're going to introduce Bitcoin so that they can join the cosmic order, right? Without it, they're just going to keep blowing each other up and infinite wars, and they're not going to be useful to the cosmic order. So we'll give them Bitcoin, then they'll adopt it and slowly develop it over the next 10, 20, 30, 100, 1,000 years, whatever it is, and then they'll be able to join the sort of intergalactic order. That's his 100% belief. That's what he thinks. And whether he's right or not doesn't really matter. What does matter is that, and it doesn't matter that if Bitcoin was delivered through divine intervention or it was created by a man or it was delivered by aliens or whatever. None of that matters. What does actually matter is that it has completely changed the path of humanity. And like you said, right at the right time. Now, you could say if it had been delivered in 1942, that'd have been a good time too. Or if it had been delivered in the 70s, we were going through stagflation, or if it had been delivered somehow, it could have been delivered in 1776. It might have changed the way the nations go. If you look at the history of the global reserve currency, Portuguese, I think if you go back far enough, it's roughly about 250 years, every 250 years or so, it transfers to somebody else. So I think if you go back far enough, it's the Italian florin and then Portuguese because of their shipping, then the British pound, and then the US dollar. And so the US dollar and American dominated hegemony has been around for about 250 years now. We're going to have our 250-year anniversary starting next year, 2026 to 1776. And it's about that time we would be switching. And I think if you'd asked historians in the 1990s what's going to be next, and probably even until the last couple of years, it would have been, oh, China's going to take over, and China's dominance will come, and the world will be using that as the reserve currency. But the problem is that global economies are so intertwined now. There is really no difference between some fiat currency from the United States versus some fiat currency from China versus some fiat currency from any other part of the world. They're so intertwined through debt and treasuries and all of these things that the idea that we're going to replace the dollar with some other fiat currency just doesn't really make any sense because they all have the same catastrophic failures intertwined with them, and there's no longer any moat between them in the way that the British pound failed and the US dollar took over because the US dollar was this rising power that could boost a fiat currency and keep it afloat through our own sort of growth. The idea and we were relatively insulated, especially in World War II, where essentially all of Europe was destroyed. The only thing left was the US. So we took over manufacturing, we took over in exports and imports, and we became this global superpower, financial superpower. And that's coming to an end here. But because they're all so intertwined, you can't just go to some other fiat currency and be like, all right, we'll have 250 years of stable growth because the Chinese yuan is going to take over. So what's going to take over? It's going to be Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is the only thing that can break this 250-year cycle. It is built to last forever, really. And I'm sure there'll be changes. There'll be things that'll come along. People are worried about quantum and whatever else, but those are just other little technologies that'll come along to challenge the technology of Bitcoin, not Bitcoin itself, not the Bitcoin network. The Bitcoin network is stronger than any of that stuff. And so to me, the way I look at Bitcoin and the way I look at the history of Bitcoin is like the same way we say BC and AD, I think there will be before Bitcoin and after Bitcoin time periods. There will be everything that came before 2009 and everything that came after. And like I said, unfortunately, I don't think either of us are going to live anywhere near long enough to really see the true impact of Bitcoin. Max Kaiser laments this quite often of I'm going to be gone before I really see the true impact of what's being built today. But I think in the same way that if you look back 2,000 years, there's only a handful of names you'll be able to really talk about, one of them being Jesus Christ. I think that Satoshi will be the same way. Like in 2,000 years, nobody will be talking about Michael Saylor or Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or any of these people, but they're going to remember Satoshi because Satoshi will be remembered as the person who changed the path of mankind. And we, for whatever reason, got to be lucky enough to be here when it happened. And not only do we get to watch mankind change, but we get to adopt this technology as it's being created. For some reason, we were planted here on this earth at this time. And for some reason, we recognize it earlier than most. And we get to benefit from it. I have to pinch myself when I think about how lucky we are and how insanely people are like, oh, I'm late to Bitcoin, I'm late to Bitcoin, I'm late to Bitcoin. I'm like, you're insane. Bitcoin's gonna last for 1,000 years. You know who you're not gonna lose to, or you know who you're earlier than? Literally any other person that's gonna exist on this planet for the next 1,000 years. You beat all of them just simply by existing today. And the fact that something you can trade paper for the greatest money ever created, you might be late the minute you can no longer give dollars for Bitcoin. Maybe that'll be considered like not late, but that'll be like you're on time. The same way that today, I can't go buy dollars with my money. My money is dollars. I can't. The fact that I can take my melting ice cubes of fiat currency and purchase the hardest money and the hardest asset that's ever been known to man and probably will ever be known to man, and people want to play games like betting on meme coins. Are you insane? What are you doing? You want to tell your grandkids that like, oh, I could have had a whole Bitcoin, but I went to Vegas instead, or I went on Coinbase and bought Fart Token 2.0, or that's talk about generational wealth. Like creating generational wealth, you can buy some Bitcoin and hopefully you can create generational wealth. You want to talk about generational trauma? Talk about missing out on Bitcoin. You want to talk about generational trauma? Be like, Grandpa, why didn't you buy Bitcoin in 2025? Like when it was under 100K, what were you thinking? I don't know. I'll give you an example. A friend of mine, either his grandfather or his great grandfather knew or was around the original investors of Coca-Cola. Like, I think maybe the guy who founded Coke was his buddy or something, whatever. But he could have been like an IPO investor in Coke, like back in the early 1900s. And it would cost him like a couple $100, right? And that couple $100 would be worth $50 billion right now. My buddy doesn't know his great grandfather, never met him, doesn't know anything about him. But here he is, 4 generations later, lamenting the fact that his great grandfather didn't buy Coca-Cola stock when it was worth a penny, right? Talk about generational trauma. Here's this guy who, by the way, does very well for himself. He's got plenty of money. He's not hurting. He's fine. But to him, he's like, my great grandfather, who I don't know and never met, dropped the ball. He completely dropped the ball on my family. If I haven't convinced you to buy Bitcoin through anything else I've said, buy Bitcoin because you don't want your great grandkid to hate you. How about that?
Yeah, I love the analogies that you have and the way that you break things down like that. One of the things you said that really stuck with me that I still think about this every day, and I actually told this to my fiance too, and it really helped her understand just how big this is.
Okay.
Is you told the story about walking through a neighborhood with $10 million homes, and they've got a for sale sign for 100K. So can you expand upon that analogy? Because I love that.
Yeah. So yeah, if you believe what I believe, which is that fiat is going to continue to base and Bitcoin is going to continue to grow, I think in our lifetimes, Bitcoin is going to be priced above $10 million a coin. Probably more than that. But let's just put a base case. I think that Bitcoin is going to trade somewhere north of $10 million a coin. If you're walking through an expensive neighborhood, you're walking through Beverly Hills right now, and each one of those homes, if you go on Zillow, is 10 million bucks. You're like, I can't afford any of that. I don't have $10 million. And you walk to the next one, it says 11 million and then 11.5. But in front of each of those right now is a for sale sign. And it says 100 and I don't know, what is it right now? $113,788. So would anybody turn down that ability? Would anybody turn down the opportunity to purchase a home? Now, it's not going to be delivered to you for a little bit, but you can invest and you can say, I'm going to buy that home that's costing that in my world is already worth $10 million. And then the rest of the world's going to figure out it's worth $10 million. And someday you'll be able to sell it that way. I think that's really what we're talking about here. You're walking through a neighborhood of $10 million homes, and there's a bunch of for sale signs that just says $113,000 today. And last year it was $50,000, and the year before that it was $16,000. And it's only gonna and the price is a function of people figuring out what you and I already know. That's what the price is. And another way to look at the price is the price that it's trading at right now is the lowest price that anybody who's holding Bitcoin is willing to sell. It's the lowest. I think the best metric for Bitcoin price, if you want to draw some lines on a chart, is to take the yearly lows and draw that straight line on the yearly lows or cycle lows. Cycle highs are weird, right? That you get these spiky 2017 spikes and 2013 spikes and even 2022 to an extent. Nobody knows how high Bitcoin is going to go, but you can chart pretty easily this line of like how low it won't go, right? Because you just run out of people who are willing to sell it at that price. Like right now, the lowest anybody in the world is willing to sell it for is $113,000. But there's people like me or people like you or people who have far more Bitcoin than either of us by a long shot, and they're not selling it till it's $1 million a coin, right? So like to them, the Bitcoin's already $1 million because they wouldn't sell it anyway. Or they're just waiting until they don't ever have to quote unquote sell it. They might spend it at that point. But it's important to realize like those prices are so meaningless in the face of global adoption. When you look at how much money there is floating around out there looking for a home and realizing that if that money comes into Bitcoin or when that money comes into Bitcoin, the price is going to go up and up. And I use this other example of imagine you live on a planet and there are 21 million homes on that planet, right? And right now, each one of those houses is worth $113,000, and everybody's living in a house who wants one. They're happy and whatnot. There's this space invader that's coming in, and they're called the banks, and they're called hedge funds, and they're called nation states, and they're called sovereign wealth funds, and they have ungodly amounts of money, trillions and trillions of dollars. But they want your house, and unfortunately, they're not making any more houses. There's only 21 million of them. What is that person who comes to your planet that wants to buy your house? What are they going to be willing to pay for it? What would they have to pay you to sell it? Knowing it's not going to be easy to get back into one, right? Like it's this massive deluge of money and this fight over this completely scarce asset. 21 million homes is nothing. 21 million people is the population of Sao Paulo, right? Like it's a blip. There's now 70 million millionaires on the planet Earth, and there's only 21 million Bitcoin. So not even basically a third of those people can own a Bitcoin. A third of all the millionaires in the world right now today could own a whole Bitcoin if they wanted to. And when I start thinking about those numbers, I start thinking about how early we are. Like we think this is a 1,000-year history. Here's another one that I love. So one Bitcoin, right now, there's roughly 450 new Bitcoin created every day through the mining process, right? And that number keeps getting cut in half, which everybody's right. But like exponentials mean that. Do you know how long it's going to take to mine the last single Bitcoin? So like the 21 millionth Bitcoin. And I know technically there's no 21, but you get my point. The very last Bitcoin that's going to be created. There's 450 created every day today. How long is it going to take to create that last Bitcoin? Do you know by any chance?
Oh, wow.
It's like how long is it going to take to mine that last Bitcoin, that last whole Bitcoin?
20 years?
40 years.
That's insane. That's wild. My guess was crazy, but wow.
So from 2100, roughly 2100, we will be at
Wow.
20,999,999. And then from the year 2100 to the year 2140, 40 years of the world's largest supercomputer fighting over that last Bitcoin.
That's insane.
That's how long it'll take to create that last one Bitcoin, right?
Whoa.
40 years. So if you own one Bitcoin today, you are essentially buying the entire network output of the world's largest supercomputer in the future of 40 years. It's those kinds of, when you start thinking about it that way, right? Like it seems, oh yeah, the price of Bitcoin could do this, could do that, because in 75 years, you by owning one Bitcoin will own 40 years of output by the world's most powerful supercomputer network.
That's insane.
So is that going to be worth more than $114,000 or less? Like it's going to be astronomically valuable. It'll be one Bitcoin will be the the 10-year budget of a township. It is hard to impress on people how incredibly scarce and valuable Bitcoin is. And people are like, well, you can't use it or you don't use it, or whatever. And that's nonsense. I use it all the time. I use it storing my value. And not only do I use it storing my value, but I use it doing it in a sovereign way that doesn't require anybody else to be involved. And not only that, we talked about 2100. 75 years from now, it's going to cost me literally $0 or zero sats or zero Bitcoin to hold that. There's no other asset like that. You can't, you want to, most boomers have a financial advisor, they get charged 1.5% per year to hold their money. You want to buy the ETF for Bitcoin? Cool. Cough over 0.25% every year. You want to buy a house? Great. Maintenance costs, insurance costs, property tax, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know what else to store value. You want to store your value in wine? Great. You got to buy a wine cellar. You got to make sure it's protected. You got to, if you have enough expensive wine in there, you got to make sure it's not a forgery. You want to store it in art? Cool. You got to get an air conditioned room. You got to make sure that's protected. You got to hire an expert to make sure you didn't get a fraudulent painting. You want to store gold? You better hire some real estate in Fort Knox and make sure it's protected by guards. You want to send that gold to somewhere else? Better hire an armored truck with a bunch of experienced Delta Force guys that are going to make sure they don't steal it from you. All of these problems that people either don't think about or don't care about are solved by Bitcoin. All I got to do is remember 12 words and store it somewhere safe, and I can hold that Bitcoin for the next 1,000 years, and it's not going to cost me $1 to do, and the network's going to protect me forever. And then when I want to send it, it's going to cost me a fraction of what it would cost to purchase something else. I had to get some work done the other day. It was like a $3,000 bill, and on the bill, it was like you can pay by bank or you can pay by credit card. Oh, by the way, it's going to cost you $90 to pay by credit card because it's a 3% fee. That same transaction, if they accepted Bitcoin, would have cost me less than 10 cents. One sap per byte, one sap per byte right now. And when people try to tell me that Bitcoin is useless or it has no use case or it's a solution looking for a problem, they just aren't paying enough attention. I have a perfect example right now. I need to pay for something in Brazil, and I'm begging them to accept Bitcoin because I don't want to send a wire transfer. I don't want to go through the pain of making sure I have all the numbers right and going down to my bank and talking to a teller and scheduling that out and spread. If they just sent me a Bitcoin address, I could be done with it in 5 minutes. And people are like, oh, I don't send that many wire transfers. It's not really the point, but it also is the point. Why would you want to use an inferior technology to these things? Medium exchange, store value. It's better in every way. Every time I use it, I'm blown away the same way I was the first time I used Uber. First time I pressed that button and an Uber showed up 3 minutes later. I was like, whoa, that changes things. I feel the same sort of magic every time I send a Bitcoin transaction, or every time I go and check my Bitcoin, or I send some Bitcoin to a friend, or I get paid in a Bitcoin bet, or I provide a service and somebody pays me Bitcoin. I didn't have to go through anybody else. I don't have to check with a bank. I don't have to ask Venmo. I don't have to ask for permission. I just did it. I did it all myself, and it did it through this magic consensus of decentralized magic internet money. It's so powerful. It's so much more than people really think about. Even Bitcoiners don't really think about it all the time. Even myself, like I have to remind myself sometimes of just something will happen. I'll use something, or like I'll go to, and now that especially now that I've used Bitcoin more often, I went to El Salvador this year and I got to use Bitcoin to like actually every day and purchase food and purchase beers and pupusas and board rentals and hotels. I paid for all of it in Bitcoin on the Lightning Network while I was standing there. And I come home and it's like, oh, it feels like I'm stepping back in time. It's bring this world here, bring it as soon as possible, and then watch the great changes unfold.
Yeah, there's this idea that Bitcoiners were living in the future and we're just waiting for the world to catch up. But yeah, thank you so much for conveying the magic of Bitcoin. You do that so beautifully. And
Okay.
yeah, I just love hearing you talk. I could listen to you talk all day. But
Awesome, man. I really appreciate that. But yeah, you're too kind.
yeah, but is anything you want to add? Where can people find you online?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter on Bitcoin Pilot, and I do Bitcoin mentoring and Bitcoin education. And as we talked about, I used to do this stuff for free because I love doing it. But I found that trying to give away Bitcoin education and Bitcoin mentorship and teaching people self custody without payment or without some sort of transaction, there's so little buy-in. And it was like it would go through over people's heads, or they would blow off meetings, or they would not really listen. I'd be like, oh yeah, okay, I'll get to it later. So I teamed up with Ben Sessions from Bitcoin Mentor. So I'm part of his team, and I do help people consulting with self-custody solutions, multi-sig, different things like that. So you can find, if you find me, Bitcoin Pilot on Twitter, then you'll also find my link in my bio for if you're looking for, okay, I want to learn how to do self-custody properly. Like I can teach you, and I love to teach people. So you can get in touch with me there.
Great. Yeah, thanks again for coming on. It was truly an honor. And yeah, I know the viewers are going to get a ton of value out of this. And yeah, I'll see you at one of the upcoming meetups.
Yeah, sounds good, man.
Yeah.
Thanks, brother.
All right. Yeah, take care.
Take care. See you.
Bye. I hope that you enjoyed this episode of The Signal. In a world drowning in noise, signal is everything. Most people are overwhelmed, distracted, and deceived, not because they lack intelligence, but because they've lost the ability to discern what truly matters. But signal cuts through the noise. And Bitcoin is pure signal. It doesn't promise. It doesn't lie. It doesn't bend to opinion or propaganda. It just is. And as the world descends into even more chaos, distraction, and distortion, your ability to identify signal, to recognize what's real, true, and timeless will be one of your greatest assets. So stay sharp, stay sovereign, stay tuned, because here on The Signal, we don't follow trends, we follow truth. I'm Dr. Satoshi, and in a world of noise, we are the signal.